All right, so we're going to go over with you guys the different types of research you can do for your research paper. So if you're at home or later on you realize that you don't really know what you're looking for, you can come back and listen to this screencast. All right, so the first way that you can approach your project is by looking for literary criticisms. As we talked about when we were doing Streetcar and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, literary criticism basically just analyzes what you already know about your book, but it just gives it in more academic terms. And obviously, these are experts and people who have studied these novels that make what you kind of already know come alive. So, if you want to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to either go to Google and type in what we have listed here, where it says like book, literary criticism, book plus theme plus literary criticism. Anyway, you can go back and look at this later, but those are the types of things that you would type into Google if you were looking for literary criticisms. You could also go to our Willowbrook databases, which I'm sure you know how to get there. If you go to the Willowbrook webpage, and then you go to the Library Media Center, which is always on the side here, then this pops up and you can go to our research databases, which you can use, all different kinds of ones, but the literature ones are right here. So this is how you would find literary criticism. You're only going to find literary criticism for books that are more analyzed, like older books, books you would read in class. If you read one of those books, this is, a great approach for you to take, but it's also not the only approach. So we're going to continue to go over the rest of those. If you can't find something through these databases, it usually means that your book is new or it's not academically analyzed. So don't worry about it. We have lots of other approaches for you. But if you did a classic text, like a To Kill a Mockingbird or something along those lines, then this is where you go. 1984 is the example we're giving you. And here is found on one of these Willowbrook databases. And here is an article about utopian society and how George Orwell shows that through his text. Okay, Ms. Calandra is going to go over the next one.
Sometimes when we analyze a book, it has a historical context, and so it makes sense to go back and potentially bring in some history into our research papers. So we're going to look at our next one as a historical approach. So if I were to have read The Hate U Give, and one of the events and obviously main aspects of the book is police brutality. So if I were to type into Google police brutality, I'm able to search historical documents, potentially news articles. Maybe I'm bringing in modern events that have also taken place. For this example, after typing in police brutality, I was able to find an article that went back and looked at it historically. Since the book takes place in modern times, I thought it may be necessary to potentially give myself a little bit of background on how long this has really been going on. And so this article begins with 1963. And then I would read through this and see how it makes some connections back to what's going on into the novel, The Hate U Give.
Okay, for the next approach, you would be taking like a real life approach. So what we mean by this is that you're going to be researching, true things about psychology or I don't know, whatever other things.
PTSD.
Yeah. Wartime, how people react to wartime. So other things besides for PTSD. If you have a book like that, I think this would work really well for you. So you're going to talk about how the characters or the events within your book portray something that really goes on in real life. And we talked about that actually through our unit when we talked about The Hate U Give and all of these things that essentially show real life, real life application. So in this case, we're talking about A Man Called Ove and talking about grief. And in our example here, we have an article from Psychology Today that talks about grief. And what you would do is research grief and talk about how the character in the text shows the cycle of grief, basically. So he goes through all of these different things and how does he end up and what happens, but you're using real research, research that talks about the clinical description of grief. So that's the types of things you would do if you wanted to take this approach.
Sometimes you can take an archetypal approach and research something like the hero, a detective, archetypal journeys
work really well for this one too, sort of like the epic hero cycle in the Odyssey, or a lot of novels have been modeled after that epic hero cycle and the different traits, especially of a hero. So if you have a book like this, that would work.
And so just typing into Google the archetype of what you're searching for, you'll find articles, you'll find connections to other pieces of literature potentially. In this case, this is actually a site that will list several other different archetypes at the top. And so in this case, we have the detective. And as you go down, you're going to start to see other examples, which could connect to a supplemental piece for you, but also will give you some examples of what what their actual character traits are. You would then go back and connect this to your character within your book that you read. Although it says real life,
sorry kids,
we mean literary devices.
Yeah. Right, so the next topic is literary device approach. And like we've been talking about in all of our common assessments, how does this literary device make the piece that you're reading come to life, basically? And how does it help support the theme? Some examples that I can think of right now is like, I know some of the students in my class are reading like Stephen King. So thinking about like, how does Stephen King's writing style help us feel that sense of dread or anticipation? And so you would look up and instead just research literary devices. For example, if we look here, you would type into Google like the use of juxtaposition or how an author creates suspense, literary devices, literary device plus the author. And a lot of times authors are really well known for their style of writing, and that's what you would be analyzing here. So if I click on literary device analysis, I come up with this super great resource that we just found ourselves, and we were like, wow, this is great. So this talks about what is juxtaposition. Then it gives examples in text, which is amazing. So it's possible you could find your text on here, which would be fantastic. But also on the bottom, it just tells us what does juxtaposition do for the reader. So the writer employs the literary device and it evokes interest. And so that's what you would be analyzing. How does my author create interest? How does my author create dread? How does my author create, whatever it is that you feel that your book has done for you? Compassion, empathy, those are all different things, but that's done by diction and juxtaposition and, extended metaphors and all those types of things. So you can use this resource or other resources like it to support your research.
The last approach is when we go back and look at the author's life. We did this with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Streetcar Named Desire. You were able to clearly see how Tennessee Williams' life was showing up through his characters and the events that were taking place within the plot. Well, this isn't true of just Tennessee Williams as an author. Many authors will bring their own life and the events that have taken place within their own artwork as well and their literature. So ways for you to search if you want to find out if your author has a historical past or something that would really lend itself to analysis. You can go into Google the author's name plus the novel, biography of the author's name. We have a database for you to search. It's Gale in Context of Biographies. And we included a link for you here to show you an example. Again, this is if your author probably is a little bit more famous or has written more than one piece, that they would have this as a nice focus or a lens for your analysis. Okay.
Okay, so the last way that you can get to that 4 to 6 resources, which we should have mentioned at the start, but you have to have 4 to 6 resources for this paper, for this 4 to 6 page paper, are to find other short stories, poems, music, movies. I don't know if I said that already. It doesn't matter. But movies, things like that you think are easily compared to your text. So again, we did this and we mimicked this for you with Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Streetcar. And a lot of you guys came up with really amazing connections between the two. Some of you even took that author approach and then also related it to those two texts. So, you can kind of play around with this however you want to. We talked about how to compare texts, and this is your option or your reason to do this. So right here we have a short story anthology online. You also might feel that something that we've read in class really relates to whatever it is that you're reading. One comparison I know a lot of people have made in my past classes, and I think one of my students is talking about this right now, is talking about Catcher in the Rye and how that compares to Perks of Being a Wallflower, and how both of those boys go through this really tough time in their life and how they overcome it. That would be an example of something that you've already read. So you've already read Catcher in the Rye probably junior year. So now just go back, get that text, and take it and compare it to the book that you're reading right now. So that's an option for you as well. In the library, they have a million anthologies with different short stories and poems and things that you might be able to relate it to. Another example of this I can think of right now, like a couple of students are reading The Color Purple. You could definitely find poetry from that time period. Like that was a huge time for poetry. And so it might be really cool to pull in poetry for, to support whatever it is that you're proving about your text. Okay, that's all.